Under your PSA 200, we're given by the standard two important objectives of the audit. Let us again get back on them. So number one, under the PSA 200, we're asked to express an opinion. So this is expression of opinion on whether the financial statements are not materially misstated. By There are two important sources of misstatements that will affect financial reporting. The first one will be errors, and the second one will be fraud in all material respects. We're always putting the fact that when we express an opinion, that means that our opinion will have to consider the assurance engagement risk. That's why we always include the phrase in all material respects, because we want to allude to the concept of assurance engagement risk. What is an assurance engagement risk? It's the risk that our assurance or opinion may be incorrect or inappropriate. Because we mentioned last time that we have limitations of audit that we have to account for, that we cannot try to eliminate but only control. And this will include those that we took up last time. So one will be non-sampling risk. This will be the human error. Number two will be the nature of the evidence that we're able to collect. So remember that we're able to only consider getting what is persuasive more than conclusive. And the third one, okay, relates to the limitations of internal control. So these are together with the sampling risk, but sampling risk can be removed by us because if we perform a detailed test, then that sampling risk will be eliminated. But in all aspects, we cannot still provide absolute because the other limitations cannot be removed or eliminated by the auditor. So auditor can only control on those other limitations we took up. That's why we always mention the fact that when we provide our expression of opinion, our opinion will only cover what is considered reasonable. So therefore, we're not providing absolute for the reason that absolute will never be attainable in any assurance engagement that we're going to undertake. So what is important is that we're able to reduce the risk to an acceptably low level. So meaning that when we partake audit, we're able to express an opinion. That meant that we have reduced our audit risk to an acceptably low level that will allow us to express an opinion. And we can only express an opinion if we have gathered sufficient and appropriate evidence. So meaning that the evidence that we're going to collect will be the basis of our expression of opinion. And this evidence that we're able to collect will come from all the procedures that we're able to perform to validate relevant assertions of the entity. So when I talk about assertions, these are the claims of the management when management prepares or prepared its financial statements. So management makes implicit and explicit representations when they prepare. When management prepares its financial statements, we as auditors will validate them based on the program that we're able to develop. So I want everyone to be clear on the fact that when we express an opinion, we're not expressing absolute. What we're able to express here will be only reasonable, and that means that we're able to provide high but not absolute assurance. And that means that it's already considered able to meet the needs of the users of the engagement. No? Meaning that at any point in time, we can rely already on the opinion of the auditor if the auditor has expressed an unqualified opinion over the financial statements under examination. Meaning that we're not expected to cover as auditors absolute assurance, but what is important is we're able to provide reasonable for decision makers to make effective decision making out of the opinion that we're able to provide, the type of opinion that we're able to provide. No? So I'm only picturing out here on number one that we have reduced our audit risk to an acceptably low level. We're not eliminating the risk because the risk cannot be eliminated because of the other limitations we mentioned that we cannot remove, but we can only try to control. And there's only one among those limitations that we can remove, but we will not do such a thing because it will be impractical for us to remove that risk, yet the other risk cannot be eliminated. So what we do over the sampling risk is we're able to control our sampling risk by able to add up more samples when we probably get evidence gathering, when we validate relevant assertions of the entity. No? So you would note over in number one that the, the financial statements here should not be materially misstated to affect, okay, of course, okay, the opinion of the auditor. And for this morning, we're going to find out what will make our financial statements misstated. And these are covered by two general sources, which are looking at right now to be errors or fraud. So there will be another source of misstatement that will not be as general as these two that we will also undertake, and this will cover non-compliance with laws and regulations. So no CLAR or non-compliance with laws and regulations will be another source of misstatement, but not general. So we consider them as a specific source of misstatement because you would agree with me that a great number of our illegal acts don't have financial impact. So a great number of them will be affecting operational more than financial. So it will be if you look at it, it will be least likely detected by the auditor when the auditor performs a financial statement audit more than errors or fraud. No? So therefore, if you look at it, the sources of misstatements that will affect financial reporting will include generally errors, fraud, specifically those non-compliance with laws and regulations which have a direct and material effect on financial reporting. Because you would agree with me that a great number of nuclear will not have any direct and material impact over the financial statement. So that's what we're going to talk about, okay, this morning. So you would always expect that when we perform our audit, we're on the idea here that these sources of the statements are the one that were able to be planned by us when we conduct our audit. And you would also agree with me that the second important objective of the audit, which will be part of our value-added activity, will be to communicate. So number two is for us to communicate. So communication of opinion, and this is going to be taken in a written report. So you would agree with me that one of the important element of assurance engagement is that we have to produce the report in a written form. That's why we call this one attestation report. So the attestation report is the written assurance report provided by our professional accountant when he or she conducts a financial statement audit. So therefore, this opinion will be contained in a written form report. We call that one attestation report, and that is covered by your independent auditor's report as stated in PSA 700 revised. So PSA 700 revised gives us the basic elements of the independent auditor's report provided by the professional accountant when this is going to be handed over to the client. No? So I think you would agree with me that these are the two most important objectives that we have to achieve. Therefore, we have to plan the audit, with an attitude of skepticism so that we can probably achieve these objectives. No? Okay, for this morning, we're going to find out what will make our financial statement able to cover this statement. No? So first of all is finding out when can a financial statements be misstated. So therefore, we have to cover the definition of misstatement. So when you say misstatement, guys, when the audited book value will not be equal to your recorded book value, so the ADV will be the audited book value. If this will not be equal to the recorded book value, there is a difference. The difference in audit is called misstatement. And this misstatement may be taken either by errors, by fraud, or from some specific circumstances no CLAR. So this will be general and this will be specific. So if you will be asked upon what will make our financial statements misstated, generally our financial statements may be misstated by both errors and fraud, and specifically no CLAR. But remember, to cover no CLAR, it has to have a direct and material effect over financial reports. Because if they will not have any direct and material effect on financial reporting, then we will not consider them, okay, as basis of our misstatement. So we have to consider, guys, no CLAR or illegal acts that will have a direct and material effect. And I think you can give me one example of this one that will have a direct and material effect, and that will be tax evasion. So when the company evades to pay tax, okay, that will be considered no CLAR, and that will have a financial impact over the financial statements we're able to prepare, and then the auditor is able to examine. No? So this is something that you have to remember upon when you're asked in the exam what will probably mistake the financial statements. No? So for our standard 240, we're going to talk about two sources of misstatements generally affecting financial reporting. This will be errors or fraud. And then for another standard, that will be 250, we're going to talk about no CLAR or non-compliance with laws and regulations or simply illegal acts. No? So therefore, our formula that will cover misstatement is that if the audited book value is not equal to the recorded book value, then there is considered to be a misstatement or a difference that we have to account for. And this misstatement, as I mentioned, will be taken either by fraud or error or no CLAR in some specific circumstances. No? So therefore, I would expect that everyone will be aware that if the source of the statement will be errors, and errors will be adjusted accordingly by management based on the proposed adjustments of the auditor can still provide unqualified opinion over those financial statements examined by the auditor. For what reason? Because errors are unintentional, meaning that we don't have any intention to deceive financial statement users. So therefore, if the entity's management will be able to provide those adjustments as proposed by the external auditor, the external auditor can provide an unqualified opinion over those financial statements examined by the auditor. However, if the source of misstatement will be fraud because of the intention to deceive financial statement users, even if the financial statements will be revised to the satisfaction of the auditor, we cannot still provide unqualified opinion. The mere fact that you have defrauded the financial statement users about those types of misstatements covering fraud, that will be tantamount to a modified opinion. So the opinion can either cover qualified if it's going to be material but not pervasive. But if the misstatements will be material and pervasive, the word pervasive will define that we will write what is considered an adverse opinion. So adverse opinion will be provided if the misstatements are considered material and pervasive. So that is also going to affect no CLAR as well. We're going to provide either qualified or adverse because of non-compliance with the laws and regulations set by the regulatory bodies. No? Example, if you were not able to pay your right taxes, because you're able to evade taxes. So that will probably try to deprive BIR of the right tax that should probably have been defrayed for the welfare of the Filipino people. No? So that means that these are all the things that we have to be on the lookout. Remember, we're only planning to consider them. We're not preventing and detecting them because those are the responsibilities of the management and the board of directors. No? Our responsibility is only to plan to consider all these factors that will affect fraud and no CLAR when we conduct our audit. So the attitude of being skeptical should be always there so as to consider that if ever there are factors that would indicate the presence of fraud or the presence of illegal activities, we should have considered investigating on them. So we're not responsible for detecting all frauds that may exist in the financial statement because if ever they are concealed through specialized means by management, we don't have any capability to detect them. It will take a fraud auditor to know one more than us as a financial statement auditor because we're only banking on samples of evidence that we're able to collect. So therefore, there's no assurance that we will be able to detect all frauds, more especially if ever they are concealed through specialized means by management through collusion. So I think it will take a fraud auditor to detect one more than us as a financial statement auditor. No? So I want everyone to picture out, okay, that the prevention and the detection of these irregularities lies with the management and the board of directors. Our responsibility is only to plan to consider the factors that will affect these sources of misstatements. No? They always ask me, sir, how can you consider the misstatements to be material? So let's now find out what will make it material. So when I say material misstatements, as what we have mentioned as misstatements, to make it material, this will be our formula for material misstatements that will make it able to qualify or provide an adverse opinion. So if the actual misstatements are greater than the tolerable misstatements, therefore the misstatements are material. So take note, if the actual misstatements are greater than the tolerable misstatements, then the misstatements that you are covering will now be considered material. Therefore, what is tolerable misstatement or what are tolerable misstatements? These are the maximum level of misstatements that we can tolerate a financial statement to have based on our planning. So meaning the auditor sets what is the max level of misstatement that we can tolerate a financial statement to have. Therefore, if the actual misstatements are greater than what we can tolerate, then the misstatements that we're able to cover here will now be considered material. Because if ever the actual misstatements will only be equal or less than the tolerable misstatement, then we can still provide what is considered unqualified because they're not material in any way. No? So let me remind everyone, if the misstatements are material, that meant that the actual misstatements that we're able to account for are greater than the tolerable misstatements that can be tolerated by the professional accountant. So the professional accountant sets the tolerable misstatements or the max level of misstatements that can be tolerated for a financial statement to have. We're not picturing out a financial statement to be 100% free from error. But what is important, the misstatement should not be able to exceed what is considered tolerable. Because if ever it would exceed what is considered tolerable, then the misstatements will not be considered already material. And therefore, that will qualify for the auditor to provide a modified opinion. And this modified opinion can either be qualified or adverse. So qualified if it's going to be material, but not pervasive when you're covering that one as adverse, that will be material and pervasive. So meaning that the only thing that will affect whether that will be qualified or adverse will be the pervasiveness of the misstatements. No? And when I say pervasive, it meant that The misstatement of one element will not only affect singly that element, but other elements. Overall, financial statements will be misstated because that is considered pervasive. So, for example, if the misstatement of inventory will not only affect inventory itself, but will also affect other elements other than inventory, because inventory account is pervasive, then we consider the misstatements to be pervasive. So therefore, that will qualify, okay, either okay covering as an adverse opinion if ever the inventory account is misstated. For example, goodwill will not have a pervasive impact, okay, over the other elements because it will only affect simply that element. So therefore, it's not considered pervasive. So you would see that cash, inventory, and sometimes receivables may have a pervasive effect on the financial statement. So we have to consider its impact so that we can decide upon what type of opinion we can provide upon when we now try to evaluate the evidence we're able to collect. So this is something that we have to remember upon. So remember that the errors and fraud, okay, are the prevention and detection of fraud and error are the responsibilities that we provide to both the management and the board of directors. So the auditor is only there to plan, to consider the factors that will affect fraud and NOCLAR when we design our audit. So therefore, the auditor is not there to detect all frauds or illegal acts, okay, in the conduct of the professional practice, because in all aspect a great number of this will be, of course, okay, taken to be concealed by management, no? So therefore we don't have the capabilities, okay, of course, to detect all of them if they are concealed through specialized means. But what is important about this particular discussion of ours is that if ever we're able to follow the guidance of the standards affecting all these sources of misstatement 240, 250, therefore non-discovery of fraud will not mean liability on our part if we have documented all the required procedures that we should have performed so that we're able to cover the engagement in accordance with the standard. So if ever we're able to do that in accordance with the standard, non-discovery of fraud or non-discovery of illegal acts will not mean liability on our part. We're only going to be liable if we're not able to meet the requirements of the standard because we did not document those procedures that we have performed. Because in all aspects, we will be talking about the procedures that we as auditors should be performing so that when we perform all of this and documented them over the working papers, non-discovery of fraud or illegal acts will not mean liability on our part. So the only thing that will probably have to be remembered by everyone is that if we have not able to meet the requirements of those standards because we did not do the procedures as upon by us by those standards, that will mean a liability on our part because we didn't plan the audit in accordance with the requirement of the framework. No? And that's what we are talking about right now. So I want everyone to be clear, okay, that errors or fraud, together with no CLAR, the prevention and detection of these sources of misstatements will be the responsibility of the entity's management and the board of directors. Our responsibility as a professional accountant is only to plan to consider the factors that will affect any of these sources of misstatement, that if ever these are able to be present in the environment that we're able to audit upon, we should have able to investigate and be skeptical to know them. Okay? But non-discovery of fraud or error, for reason, okay, that a great number of them are concealed through specialized means, will not mean liability on our part. And I want that remembered by everyone. So for this morning, we're going to get the guidance of 240 because in all aspects, 240 provides us with all our responsibilities that if ever we're able to perform all of them and we're able to document them in the working paper, non-discovery of fraud will not mean liability on our part. No? So you would agree with me that this is a relevant standard because that will probably affect, okay, our responsibility, okay, when we plan the audit accordingly. And also 250 will relate to the NOCLAR. So if you have taken a look at the standards we took up. Okay, we started our discussion with PSA 200. I think everyone is aware that we start our discussion with PSA 200. So I just want to wrap up all the responsibility standards that we're going to talk about today, because I think by next week, we're now moving over to the process of audit. So the responsibility standard starts with the PSA 200. I think that's the one we talked about a while ago, the overall objectives of the audit. Then we talked about last week 210. So that will be covered as terms of engagement. So we have the terms of engagement when we talk about the importance of engagement letters in our engagement proper. So terms of engagement 200 will be the overall objectives of the audit. Overall objectives of the audit. Okay, 220, we talk about quality control system in an audit of financial statements. And we also talk about the importance of working papers, so that will be 230. So this is going to be working papers or audit documentation. And then we are talking about right now 240, that will be fraud and fraud detection. Then we're talking about later 250, no CLAR. Then we talk about communication. We're going to communicate audit matters of governance interest. So we call that AMGI. AMGI stands for audit matters of governance interest to those charged with governance. So this will be our BOD or board of directors. No? And one example of AMGI is one that we were going to talk about when we discuss about internal control. This is 265. So this is going to be significant deficiencies in the design of internal control. And this is equivalent to our reportable conditions. So all of this that you're looking upon right now are known to be our responsibility standards. And they should be performed or adhered by professional accountants when they do their audits with the respective clients. No? So let me remind everyone, 200, overall objectives, 210, terms of engagement. This will relate to our engagement letter. 220, that will be the quality control system that will have to be implemented at the individual level. We talked about overall level last time. We covered 230, that will be audit documentation or our working papers. Then 240 will now be our topic today. That will be fraud and fraud detection. Then we have 250 that will talk about illegal acts. We call that non-compliance with laws and regulations. Then we have 260 that will relate to communication of audit matters of governance interests. We call that one. This will be able to affect our board of directors, and we need to communicate them over on a timely basis to those charged with governance. So that will be our topic later. And then we're going to consider also one example of AMGI that we will be able to communicate, and that will relate to your significant deficiencies when we test the controls of the entity. And that will be known to be our reportable conditions. And this is one thing that we communicate to the board of directors relating to our test of control. So you would see that all these standards are considered relevant in the conduct of our professional practice, and I want everyone to take a look at the salient points of all these standards. That will be the basis of your quiz one. No? So I would expect that everyone will take a look at these responsibility standards other than the regulatory and the ethical framework that we're able to talk about, because this is part of the professional framework that we're able to relate upon. No? Can you see the importance of this one, guys? Okay, and I want you to put emphasis on them. Okay, when you now try to study, okay, your materials, no, at any point, no. So we're now going to consider, okay. And I see a reaction button from everyone that they are able to at least account, okay, for these relevant standards that will affect our responsibilities. And we're now going to center our discussion with our 240 this morning. No? Let me just try to stop sharing so we can probably try to, okay. So have you seen the importance of these standards? Can I see a reaction button from everyone that are able to at least relate, okay, to these relevant standards that we are able to enumerate, no? So I want you to at least get back on them as part of your online learning, no? So let's now move over to the PowerPoint presentation affecting our fraud and fraud detection, which I believe everyone must have looked upon, okay, in his or her okay, asynchronous learning. So let's now start to share the PowerPoint presentation to everyone. Okay. Okay, let's start to cover our presentation. And this time we're now going to cover fraud and error in an audit of financial statement, and we will get the guidance of 240. So PSA 240, can you see the PowerPoint presentation I'm sharing right now?
Opo, sir.
Okay, the PSA 240 relates to the standard that deals with the auditor's responsibilities relating to fraud in an audit of financial statements. So we're going to find out what are those important responsibilities of our professional accountant in the conduct of doing his audit in relation to fraud. So what are the objectives of the standard 240? Number one is for us as professional accountant to identify and assess the risk of material misstatement of the financial statement due to fraud. So remember that the risk of material misstatement covering financial statement will arise due to fraud or no CLAR or errors for that matter. So generally it will be fraud. And for us to obtain sufficient appropriate evidence regarding the assessed risk of material misstatement due to fraud by designing and implementing appropriate responses. So we're going to find out what will be our appropriate response when we now assess the risk of material misstating the financial statements due to fraud. And we're going to cover two responses later as we now try to affect, okay, the guidance of the standard. And for us to respond appropriately to fraud or suspected fraud identified during audit. So you would agree with me that when you are asked upon what are the sources of misstatements, our answers will be general and specific. So generally, it will be errors of fraud, and specifically, it will be no CLAR, or we talk about, okay, your illegal acts. But remember, for that to be included as part of the sources of the statement, that should have been direct and material effect on the financial statement. Because if it will have an indirect effect over the financial statements, then we are not obligated to consider them. So we're only obligated to consider them when it will have a direct and material effect on the financial statements. So remember that the responsibility to prevent and detect errors and fraud in an audit of financial statement rests with both the management and those charged with governance, are simply our board of directors. So we're not giving the responsibility solely to management. We're also allowing the board of directors to jointly be responsible for the prevention and the detection of fraud through development of an effective internal control. So it's important that this should be a collaborative effort of both the management and the board of directors to develop effective controls that will try to reasonably assure that they will be able to prevent and detect and correct these irregularities. No? So remember that internal control will not provide absolute assurance that irregularities will be eliminated. So we're only providing here reasonable assurance. So here we're able to provide strong emphasis on fraud prevention, which may reduce opportunities to commit fraud. So remember that one thing that we can probably do upon, if we're both the management and the board of directors, is to develop effective internal controls. No? So internal controls are policies and procedures affected by the management and the board of directors to prevent, detect, and correct these misstatements or irregularities once detected. No? So I think that's something that we have to at least remember upon as part of our responsibilities, both as management and board of directors, and also as auditor. So the auditor is only there to plan, to consider the fraud risk factors that will affect financial reporting. So we're only there to consider the fraud risk factors or the indicators of fraud. We're not there to prevent and detect fraud. We're only there to plan, to consider the factors that if those factors are evident in the financial statements we're able to examine, we should have investigated on them and be skeptical to cover the audit. So remember that when we talk about errors, in our conduct of doing our examination, errors are able to refer to unintentional misstatements in the financial statements, including omission of an amount or disclosure, and this will include any of the following. Number one, it will cover mathematical or clerical mistakes in the underlying records and accounting data. That's one. Another important thing that we have to look upon will be an incorrect accounting estimate arising from oversight or misinterpretation of facts. So there's no intent on your part to deceive the financial statement users. So it's just a matter of oversight or a negligence. It's going to be a simple negligence on your part to cover that particular application. No? Mistake in the application of accounting policies, no intent to deceive financial statement users. So in all aspects, this can be corrected by the auditor or by the management through the proposed adjustment provided by the auditor when the auditor conducts or performs engagement over these clients' financial statements. No? So that's something that we have to remember upon the word unintentional. When we talk about fraud, which is of course different from errors because this now cover intention. It's an intentional act by one or more individuals among management. So if it's going to be performed by more individuals, we call that collusion. Another word for collusion will be connivance. So there's a collusion and connivance that have taken place and that will affect, of course, this may be taken by the board of directors, the employees or third parties involving the use of deceit to obtain unjust or illegal advantage. So these are what frauds are. So therefore, there will be a collusion that may probably have taken place intentional in nature, and the most important thing about the fact of fraud, there is damage or loss sustained by the party who unjustifiably relied from the false representation of the fraudster. So remember, there are two fraudsters that we're going to talk about in this particular discussion. The first fraudster will be the employees, and the second fraudster will be the management. So two types of fraudsters, and that will define the types of fraud that we're going to identify. So remember that the most important thing about the fraud is that there's a use of deceit to obtain unjust or illegal advantage. So there are two types of fraud depending on the fraudsters or perpetrators of fraud. This will include management as well as employee. So we will now try to distinguish these two types of fraud depending on the fraudsters who committed the irregularities. So the first one will be the management and the second one will be the employee. If it's going to be the management fraud, another word for management fraud will be fraudulent financial reporting. And this will involve the following. So number one, manipulation, falsification, including forgery or alteration of accounting records or supporting documentation from which the financial statements are prepared. So you would notice here that when it is covered as management, they will be able to affect financial statements themselves. And usually management fraud performed, of course, by management may even solicit employees to do that for them. No? So in terms of impact, this will be high. In terms of occurrence, the other type of fraud will be high, and that will be the employee fraud. So in terms of impact, this will be high. In terms of occurrence, the other one will be high, and that will be the employee fraud that we're able to talk about. No? So here, management fraud may include also misrepresentation in or intentional omission from the financial statements of events, transactions, or other significant information. This may also involve intentional misapplication of accounting principles relating to amounts, classifications, manner of presentation, or disclosure. You would also agree with me that fraudulent financial reporting also involve management overriding of controls that otherwise may appear to be operating effectively. Techniques that may be covered to consider that it will be taken as a management fraud will include any of the following. Number one, recording fictitious journal entries, particularly close to the end of accounting period to manipulate operating results or achieve other objectives. Number two, inappropriately adjust assumptions and changing judgments used to estimate account balances. And number three, you can probably omit, advance, or delay. The common thing that happens when you talk about management fraud is omitting and advancing and even delaying transactions. So it will not be a part of what you're able to consider if ever you're going to consider the next step to be more important for you to cover your compensation increase. No? So that's something that we have to look upon as a professional accountant. No? So that will be omitting, advancing, or delaying. However, if you're going to consider employee fraud, this will be also known as misappropriation of assets. So this will include any of the following. So employee fraud will include embezzlement of receipts, stealing assets, or theft, or causing an entity to pay for goods or services that have not been received by the entity. So these are known to be employee fraud or misappropriation of assets. No? So in terms of occurrence, this will be high in terms of impact, the other one will be high. Remember that as an auditor, we have to be aware about the attributes of risk of materially misstating the financial statement due to fraud. And this will include four important attributes. No? So as auditor, we have to consider what type of fraud has been committed, whether that will be employee fraud or management fraud. The second thing that we have to look upon will be the significance of the fraud committed, whether that will be significant or insignificant in our financial reporting. And also the likelihood it will affect not only one, likelihood that it will probably try to cover misstatement, okay, will be also considered, and the pervasiveness of the misstatements, if it will only not affect simply one element but other elements or overall financial statements, then we consider the misstatements to be pervasive. So pervasive will be the impact of the misstatement of that element in the overall financial statements of the entity. And that will be considered pervasiveness. No? So we have the pervasiveness, the likelihood, the significance, and the type of fraud. So these are the things that will have to be looked out by the auditor when he or she conducts an audit of financial statements. No? Remember that for fraud to be committed, remember the fraudsters, either management or employee, should have covered these elements. So these are the elements of fraud. We call them fraud risk triangle, or simply our FRT. So for our fraud risk triangles, will cover our mnemonics RIO, RIO, or we can cover PAO, PAO. So rationalization will be R, incentive will be the second one, and the third one will be opportunity. When we use the other mnemonic, we can cover POW. So POW will stand for the pressure. Okay, A will cover the attitude, and letter A will talk about the opportunity, okay, of fraud to be committed. Usually, guys, we cannot really control RIPA over in our setting of fraud. But what we can always deter will be the last one, the opportunity. And the opportunity for them to be committed by establishing or developing effective internal controls. If the internal controls are able to function effectively, then we're able to minimize, okay, commission of these irregularities by the fraudsters. No? So I think if you have a good controls in place, no, so hindi naman ibig sabihin kapag may controls tayo, that means okay that we're able to be providing okay assurance that no irregularities will be captured already. All irregularities will be eliminated. So I think that's not going to be a possibility, no? Because people are people. When they're given opportunities to commit irregularities, they will do so. No? So we call that one our attitude. No? So I always believe on the fact that kapag ang tao likas na malikot ang kamay, okay? So I think we can probably deter that. But what we can probably always try to inhibit is that at least we have good controls that will be in place so that we will probably able to detect, okay, this once able to commit it or deter, okay, the happening of this one over in our financial statements, no? So I want us to always remember the importance of the triangle, no? So that's the RIO, okay? That will be a rationalization, okay, the incentive, okay, and the opportunity, or the pressure, the attitude, and the opportunity as well. So this will be all our basis for the fraud risk triangle. No? So as auditors, can I just be clear about the fact that we have to maintain this attitude over in our financial statement, okay, examination. So dapat skeptic tayo. At kapag skeptic tayo, we're able to treat management neither honest nor dishonest. So we have to be fair in the conduct of our examination, that in case we're able to account for certain fraud risk factors, we should have corroborated on them, no? And that is the attitude of being skeptical or able to be corroborative, okay, in our conduct of examination, no? So tandaan po natin na yung assessment ng risk natin, okay, will not only affect individual but also the overall level. Actually, sa practice, when we respond to the risk, we're able to utilize the individual level for practicality purposes, no? Cost versus benefit criteria. So that will be our basis, no? So for this session, we're now listing down ano ba yung mga responsibilities that should have been covered by the auditor. That once you're able to document all these procedures, and accordingly may lumabas na fraud that we're not able to detect. Are we going to be held responsible for not able to detect that? No way we will be taken, okay, to be liable if we have exercised all these important standards documented in our working papers. So it's important that we have planned it accordingly, no? So that none, okay, so we're able to at least able to be responsible if ever we're not able to do that. Okay, we're going to be accountable for not able to detect fraud. So laging nauuna lagi sa lahat ng mga procedure na pag-uusapan natin relating to the to the phases of the audit will be always staff discussion. I always believe on the importance of talking to one another. No? So mas maganda kasi guys yung we try to take everybody's experiences incorporated in the program that we're going to develop. Kasi may mga pagkakataon guys na may mga nakapag-audit na ng ganitong type ng entity at they were able to discover fraud. So kailangan natin makuha yung mga inputs nila para pag nag-design tayo ng program over, may include natin yung mga fraud risk factors na yan na in-indicate okay, ng ating mga staff member who audited the same type of company that we're able to cover. For example, if you have audited a pharmaceutical company and these team members of yours are able to audit previously some pharmaceutical companies. So, kailangan natin hingin sa kanila yung mga inputs nila kung saan dapat tayo mag-focus o ano mga accounts dapat bibigyan natin ng emphasis when we cover evidence gathering. Kasi kung pareho lang naman yung industriya o yung industry that we're able to audit, malaking factor yung mga nagawa na ng mga previous auditor natin na nakapag-audit na ng ganitong company. No? So that's number one. I think in number one, you have to provide this attitude of being skeptical as one thing that you have to inform the team members to have. Kasi skeptical is something that you're able to develop, no? When you cover audit, okay, per se, no? Number two is for us to obtain information needed to identify the risk of material misstatement. So, pag sinabi kong obtaining the information, marami tayong pwedeng gawin, okay, na mga procedures for us to obtain information needed to identify the risk. And one of the most common procedures that will have to be undertaken by the auditor in obtaining the information needed to identify is when we do inquiries. So, kanino ba dapat tayo mag-inquire kung gusto natin makakuha ng impormasyon that will identify risk of material misstatement due to fraud? It will be either the management. So, kailangan natin mag-obtain kay management, okay, the board of directors or those charged with governance. So, gusto nating malaman from them when they have knowledge of frauds committed in the past. If they mention that they have no knowledge and they have no frauds committed based on their knowledge, so we have to be skeptical and ask the management, okay, to provide us with a representation letter that we can corroborate upon. No? So gusto natin mag-corroborate look sa mga impormasyon na matatanggap natin that will probably affect okay, financial statements, okay, fairness of presentation. No? So another thing that we can probably try to cover when we obtain information, which is a requirement in audit, is for us to perform analytical procedures. No? So hindi po mawawala sa second bullet point yung pag-cover natin ng analytical procedures. So we're going to perform analytical procedures so as to obtain information needed to identify the risk. And what will be this analytical procedures that we're going to perform? Kasi sinabi natin analytical, this will be able to identify unusual fluctuations that will affect both financial and non-financial info. So dito sa pangalawa, we're able to perform analytical procedures. So we're able to investigate those differences that we're able to account for from what should be taken by the entity. No? So tinignan natin yung mga fraud risk factors na ito. Whether they're probably able to cover that. No? Sa analytical procedure, guys, napakalaga nung role ng mga tools sa pwede natin gamitin kapag tayo nagpa-perform ng analytical procedures. One of the least costly analytical procedure that is always performed by a great number of auditors will be ratio analysis. So napansin nyo ba, ratio analysis will give us, of course, ratios covering those in your current from your previous financial statements. So we want to see the differences or unusual fluctuations that may have arisen with the current period financial statement. So gusto natin malaman if there are some fraudulent financial reporting that has taken place because the values will be different from what is considered usual figures of the entity. So sinisilip natin, guys, yung mga past years financial statement analysis ng mga entity para ma-compare natin siya sa current period. No? So napakalaga ng role ng analytical procedure. So in one examination question, this is a required procedure that need to be performed by the auditor when the auditor plans So we can also consider, for second bullet point, fraud risk factors. So pag sinabi natin fraud risk factors, these are the indicators of the elements of fraud, RIO or PAO. So the elements of fraud, will probably be captured by RIO or PAO, sabi natin. So when we perform, when we cover consideration of fraud risk factors will be the third item we talk about on obtaining information. We're able to account for those fraud risk factors that may affect financial reporting. They're able to be present. We have to account whether they have affected the financial statements of the entities balances in terms of those fraudulent activities identified by us. No? So tinitingnan natin yan as an auditor. No? So pag tinanong kayo, guys, pag analytical procedures, ito yung tine-check natin yung unusual fluctuations that may have arisen from past financial information to the current period financial information of the financial statements we're able to audit. No? So we also consider the fraud risk factors. Pag fraud risk factors, indicators of the presence of the elements. No? That will be RIO or PAO. No? So pag sinabi natin fraud risk factors, indicators lang po siya. Hindi ibig sabihin kapag may indicators, meron ng fraud that we will be able to identify. So once we're able to identify fraud, surely these indicators are around. No? So pag sinabi natin fraud risk factors are the indicators of the elements of fraud. And once we're able to identify a fraud, surely these fraud risk factors are evident. No? So can you check, guys, what are some of those fraud risk factors that will affect our fraudulent financial reporting and our employee fraud? We're going to talk about them as we go along with the slides that we're able to utilize for this morning. No? So we're going to obtain the information needed to identify. We're going to identify the risk that may result in a material misstatement due to fraud. We're going to talk about the attributes of the of the auditor in considering fraud and fraud detection. We talk about the type of fraud, the significance of the fraud, the likelihood, and the pervasiveness of the fraud. So these are things that we look upon when we cover identifying the risks that may result in a materially misstated financial statements due to fraud. No? So meron tayong fraud risk factors that will affect fraudulent financial reporting and those fraud risk factors that will affect our misappropriation of assets. No? So we'll just take a look on them as we go along. Okay? Tapos pagkatapos natin mag-identify, we're now going to assess the identified risk. Actually, ang assessment natin will be done at two levels. Yung first level will be the overall, and the second one will be the individual level. So pag nag-assess po tayo, we're able to cover two levels. No? Overall level, and the other one will be the individual level. Actually, when we respond, mas ginagamit natin si individual level more than the overall level, no? Because of cost versus benefit criteria, no? So yun ginagamit natin. So we're going to also find out the response, that we're going to cover for the results of the assessment. We're going to evaluate the audit evidence. We're going to communicate, about fraud to management, audit committee, and others. So it means that when we communicate, guys, that will be always one level higher from the one who committed the irregularity. So lagi tayo nagko-communicate one level higher from the one who committed the irregularity. No? And then we're going to communicate about fraud to management, the audit committee, and others as well. No? And we're going to document the auditor's consideration. So all of these are all important responsibilities, and pag nagawa po ng auditor yan, that meant that the auditor will not have any liability to speak of, no? Kasi nagawa niya to the requirement of the standard. So nag-document ng auditor in his or her working papers. No? So ito yung mga fraud risk factors that I want you to at least take into account when you review. So sa management fraud, meron tayong tatlong fraud risk factors or indicators of the presence of the elements of fraud. So ito yung MIO, M-I-O. This will cover management characteristics, and then we have industry conditions, and we have operating characteristics and financial stability. No? So usually, guys, pag management characteristics, ito yung mga compensation of the management is tied up to some variables that are not able to, that will be under the control of the management. Minsan kapag halimbawa naka-tie up yung compensation package mo sa net sa gross sales, then chances of able to cover allowing advance production to be part of the sales already. So I think that's to meet the requirement. I think that will be a management characteristic. No? Number two will be industry condition. And third one will be operating characteristics and financial statement. Financial stability, no? For that matter. No? Dito naman kapag when we talk about employee fraud, ito naman yung SEC, susceptibility of assets to misappropriation. Then we have employee relationship and pressure. Lalo na kapag ang employee is pressured, so that will probably try to allow him or her to commit irregularities. And of course, lalo na kapag mahina ang controls natin, that will not deter the commission of fraud. No? Commission of fraud. So we have to be very skeptical about the situation. No? Okay, let's take our break first, so that we can probably continue covering the other aspects of the ano. So can I see a reaction button that everyone has understood the initial responsibilities because we're going to talk about the other responsibilities to complete everything para at any point alam natin na kapag nagawa natin lahat ng mga yan in their proper order, we will not be accountable for non-detection of fraud. No? So mag-break muna po tayo for a health break for 15 minutes. No? Okay, let's continue. Just want to see a reaction button whether everyone is around so we can continue covering the other responsibilities, okay, that will have to be taken by our professional accountant like you in the future. No? So let's now take the continuation of our discussion. Okay, can you see the PowerPoint presentation I'm sharing right now? Nakikita po ba?
Yes, sir.
Yes.
Okay, is it moving?
Yes, sir.
Okay, sige. So when we respond, can I just emphasize that when we assess at two levels always, no? First level will be overall. So dapat we are able to account it at overall financial statement and also individual elements or assertion level. But when we respond, we have a choice of responding whether we're going to respond using the overall assessment that we're able to make or yung individual assessment which is more practical to utilize. Kasi sa practice talaga, mas ginagamit natin will be the individual level or the assertion level. So we're able to account for the three important things kapag nako-cover tayo ng individual level. That will be the nature, the timing, and the extent of tests we are going to perform. So let's get first what will be the responses that we can probably cover kapag ang ginamit nating assessment level will be the overall. So number one will be we're able to assign personnel with more experience and more supervision. I think that will be a one response that we can probably take into account kapag overall yung ginamit nating assessment level. The second one will be to consider significant accounting policies, and then we take audit less predictable with an element of surprise. So we don't try to provide procedures in advance. So we just perform the procedures as they are required so that we can probably find out if there are indicators of fraud that we can probably identify that we should be skeptical about to investigate. No? So these are all the responses that we are going to provide if we're talking about the overall level. But let me remind everyone, for cost versus benefit consideration, what we're able to account in audit will be the individual level. In the individual level, we're able to cover the N, the T, and the E of our examination. And this is what we're going to also perform when we do our planning later. No? So the individual level will answer three important things when we assess the risk at the individual level. No? So it will cover the nature, it will cover the timing, and it will cover the extent of the samples we're going to consider. So if the assessment, let's just define first what these three important things are. When you talk about nature, you're going to define whether you're going to take it in a more reliable or additional corroborative information. And tawag natin dito will be the extensive approach, or you can do it the other way around, okay, the restricted approach. If the assessment of your risk will be high, the nature of your examination will be extensive. At yung assessment mo naman will be low, what will probably be the best nature of examination will be restricted. So we don't need to perform an extensive approach kapag yung assessed risk naman natin is not that high as compared with the assessment that is considered high because of the indicators of fraud that we're able to identify. No? The timing will cover kapag you're taking it under the extensive approach, we're able to perform them both current and year-end. So it will be a year-round examination. Hindi kagaya pag if ever the assessment will be not that high, so it's a restricted, so we're able to perform current or interim only. No? Kapag extent naman, we're able to cover more samples if we're able to assess it at a high level, so we're able to do an extensive approach. Kapag restricted approach naman, we're able to cover less samples as compared with the one of restricted. So this is the one that we're able to follow if we're able to respond to the result of the assessment at individual level. So we're able to answer two important things. It will answer the nature, the timing, and the extent of tests that we're going to undertake. So we only have two responses as regards individual level. If the assessed risk will be high, we cover an extensive approach. If the assessed risk will not be that high or low, we're able to do a restricted examination. The timing will cover current and interim and year end if it's going to be extensive, while the other one will be current or interim only. While the extent of samples that we're going to get will be many for this response that we're able to take if that assessment will be high, and then the other way around, it will be few samples if ever the assessment will not be that high. No? So we're able to respond. Let me remind everyone. And then the next thing we're going to find out is we're going to evaluate the evidence we're able to collect. In the evaluation, let me remind everyone, okay, this is the auditor's responsibility if errors or fraud are detected. So let's get two scenarios. If the amounts shown in the client's accounting records and the audited amounts differ, as what we have mentioned initially in our first discussion, then there is a difference that we have to identify. No? And the auditor must make a professional judgment as to whether these differences will be taken as errors or fraud. Remember that errors generally should require adjustment of the client's accounting records, whereas fraud will have serious implications that go beyond the monetary effect on the financial statements. Actually, what will be more severe is that, of course, fraud will have covered, of course, losses and damages on those parties who unjustifiably relied from the false representation of the fraudsters, either management or employees. No? So therefore, errors can be corrected with the proposed adjustments taken into by the management provided by the auditor, but fraud will be different. Even if the financial statements will be revised to the satisfaction of the auditor, still we cannot provide unqualified opinion. The mere fact that we have an intention to deceive financial statement users, that is tantamount to provision of a modified opinion. And that will either cover qualified or adverse. Qualified, material, but not pervasive. When you cover adverse, that will be material and pervasive. So if ever the difference will now be attributed as fraud, and we are going to define fraud two ways. If the fraud will be material but not pervasive, and if the fraud will be material and pervasive. So if going to be fraud identified as material but not pervasive, we provide qualified opinion. But if the fraud identified will be material and pervasive, we provide an adverse opinion. So remember that if the auditor determined that a difference is or may be fraud, but the effect on the financial statement could be material but not pervasive. We provide here a qualified opinion, and the auditor should perform two important activities. The first one is that we have to refer the matter to an appropriate level of management at least one level above those involved. So remember that the communication of fraud will be one level higher from the one who committed the fraud. So remember that it is always important to do this communication on a timely basis. And the second one is that we're going to satisfy ourselves that the implication of the fraud for the other aspects of the audit has been given proper consideration. So these are the two things that we should be able to perform when the fraud is assessed to be material but not pervasive. So therefore, we're going to consider providing a qualified opinion over in the financial statements that we're able to examine when we prepare our auditor's report. So remember that qualified opinion will be rendered upon if the fraud is material but not pervasive. And we have to perform those two important activities as part of our requirement. However, if the fraud will be determined to be material and pervasive, therefore it will be an adverse opinion. The standard says that we have to perform additional procedures other than those two procedures we covered a while ago. So we're going to consider the implication of audit for the other implication of the fraud on the other aspects of the audit. That's part of our responsibility a while ago. So we're going to cover that also here. We're going to communicate, okay, the fraud one level higher from the one who committed the fraud or the fraudster's level. So therefore, that's also the same thing we covered a while ago, but there will be two additional procedures that we are going to perform or two more procedures that we need to comply with, and that will be to obtain additional evidence, okay, whether fraud is material, what effect will that have over in the financial statement. So we're asked by the standard to perform additional procedures. And if ever, we are going to ask the client to seek legal counseling. So legal counseling will have to be done, okay, by our client, okay, as part of our recommendation. But remember, guys, that if ever you're able to not be allowed by management to perform additional procedures as required by this particular standard. Therefore, we will not provide, we will provide, I mean, a qualified or a disclaimer of opinion for the inability for on our part to perform additional procedures. So if ever management will not allow us to perform those additional procedures that we are required upon here if the fraud is material and pervasive, we're going to provide a qualified or disclaimer of opinion. If management will not accept a qualified or disclaimer of opinion brought about by inability on our part to obtain evidence, then that is the time we're going to withdraw from the engagement. So withdrawal from the engagement will only be covered if ever management will not allow the auditor, if management will not be able to accept a qualified or disclaimer of opinion paragraph. So, meaning that the auditor's responsibility for material fraud extends to the opinion in the audit report. The financial statement should be revised if necessary, or a qualified or adverse opinion will be issued. Qualified, material but not pervasive. Adverse opinion will be material and pervasive. If auditor will not be allowed, or the auditor may not be allowed to, or may be unable to perform necessary auditing procedures to conclude whether possible fraud materially affects the financial statements, the auditor should, number one, disclaim an opinion or express a qualified opinion under FS and report the findings on possible fraud to the audit committee or those charged with governance or our board of directors. So these are two things that we should be remembering upon if ever we're not allowed or we're able to perform the necessary auditing procedures required by the examination. So we're going to disclaim or express a qualified opinion, or we're going to report the findings to the audit committee or the board of directors or those charged with governance. Remember that the auditor should withdraw from the engagement if the client refuses to accept a disclaimer of opinion or a qualified opinion because of the circumstances mentioned a while ago. So can I just also clear out before we try to cover 250? There are two more that we're able to complete the requirement. So, and when we probably able to communicate, let me remember everyone that communication should be done one level higher from the one who committed the fraud. So please note on that. If the one who committed the fraud will be the top level, okay, we have to report this one over to the audit committee, okay, so that the audit committee will be able to take, okay, of course, action on that reported irregularity. No? So please note, okay, that if the fraud is committed by the senior level, it is always important that the audit committee will be informed on a timely basis. No? So remember that the last activity that we should be performing upon here is that we should have documented all those activities we performed so that non-discovery of fraud will not able to provide liability on our part because we're able to do the engagement based on the requirement of PSA 240. So if we're going to look back again, can we just again recall on those important activities we did so that when we're able to document them over in the working paper, this will not mean any liability on our part. Number one, we're able to perform a staff discussion or brainstorming. I think that's the first thing we did. The second one is we were able to obtain information needed to identify the risk. The third one, we're able to identify the risk. These are the attributes we talked about a while ago. After we're able to identify, we're able to assess the identified risk. And this assessment may be done at two levels. We have the overall and the individual level. After we're able to assess, we're able to respond. And I think we made clear about the response, whether that will be taken overall or individual level. So overall, we have to consider those important activities, okay, to respond if it's going to be overall. And when we talk about individual level, we're able to talk about the importance of the nature, the timing, the extent of our examination. Then after which we're able to evaluate the evidence. This will be our basis for what type of opinion are we going to attach over in our auditor's report. So if the difference will be taken as errors or the difference will be taken as fraud. And then we're also able to, after we're able to evaluate, we're able to communicate, okay, this over one level higher from the one responsible of the irregularity, and we're able to document. So you see how structured our activities are when we consider fraud in an audit of financial statements. So if all of these are documented accordingly over in our working papers, then non-detection of fraud will not mean liability on our part because we're able to do the engagement based on what the requirement of 240 as mentioned. No? So you see the importance of 240 over in our audit. Now this time we're now going to talk about again another source of misstatement, but this time we're going to talk about the specific source of misstatement. And this specific source of misstatement relates to non-compliance or no CLOR. So let's define what 250 mentioned about non-compliance. So non-compliance as mentioned by 250 refers to acts of omission or commission. So it can be omitted or committed by the entity being audited, either intentional, take note of that, or unintentional, which are contrary to the prevailing laws or regulation, meaning that you're able to not able to follow the provisions of the law. And such acts include transactions entered into by or in the name of the entity or on its behalf by management or employees. So what makes it different, guys? In the fraud, it is the fraudsters who are able to benefit from the irregularities committed. But in this source of misstatement, it is the entity that is able to benefit from the actions taken by the employees or the management to the deprivation of the regulators. So who is deprived here? The one that will be deprived here will be the regulator who covered the law. For example, if you did not or if you evade tax, therefore tax payments, that will mean that it will deprive, of course, BAR of its of its facility to able to use the money to defray to the Filipino welfare. No? I think that's where the taxes of the Filipino people should go. Okay, for the welfare of the Filipino people themselves. No? So ibig sabihin kapag hindi po tayo nakapagbayad ng tamang tax, we're not able to provide the services that should be covered for the Filipino people, no? So malaking factor din 'yan, no? So, ibig sabihin, when you talk about non-compliance, ang nadideprive dyan, yung regulator. Ang nagbe-benefit dyan, si entity. At ang gumagawa para kay entity will be the management or employees. So, this is different from the other one kasi in the other one, who perform those irregularities are the fraudsters themselves. So sila yung nakikinabang over on that thing. At the one that will be deprived on fraud will be the entity. So the entity is the one that is able to be on the losing end. Dito naman, ang losing end naman natin will be the regulators, okay, themselves. So malaking factor ito, okay, parang kung titignan natin, least likely detected ito kasi karamihan ng mga illegal activities that are able to be committed by the entity itself will be related to operational more than financial. No? So in this case, let's cover non-compliance by clients are acts attributable to entity under audit, acts of management, or employees acting on behalf of the entity. So non-compliance by clients, let me remind everyone, do not include personal misconduct by entities personnel that is unrelated to business. No? So ibig sabihin, we will not consider those personal misconduct as our basis for our non-compliance kasi it has to be related to the entity itself. No? So itong mga personal misconduct will be affecting the internal controls of the entity later. Kasi di ba pa nag-audit tayo, we also have to check the control environment. At malaking factor sa control environment will be, of course, okay, the employees who will probably make up okay, the control environment. So tinitingnan din natin yan. Pero in our concept of no CLAR, okay, what we are referring here will be the non-compliance with laws and regulations by the entity committed by the employees or management, okay, themselves. No? So that's something that we have to look upon. No? So sabi ko nga kanina, this is least likely detected more than the fraud that we're able to talk about a while ago. So what are examples of no CLAR or non-compliance? We have those that will have direct and material effect. Meron tayong responsibility to identify them if ever we're able to be skeptical to cover the engagement. Okay, so dapat ma-cover natin yan. Okay, yung namang isa that will have an indirect effect, wala tayong responsibility to cover them. So when you say examples of non-compliance more likely to be detected are those with direct and material effect on the termination of FS include tax loss affecting accruals, and we have revenue accrued on government contracts. So ito yung mga examples that will have a direct and material effect on financial reporting. No? Yung isa naman, wala. So we're not likely to detect on them. So we have to consider that as no responsibility on our part. No? This will include any of the following, like for example, loss related to securities trading, occupational safety and health, and price fixing. So ito yung mga example ng mga illegal acts, okay, that will have no financial implication but will affect, of course, the entity operational. So we're not obligated to detect them. So ang hinahanap lang natin are those that will affect financial reporting. Kasi yun lang naman ang hinahanap natin when we consider fraud or no CLAR are those that will affect financial reporting. So we know exactly what type of opinion would probably be provided depending on those sources of misstatements identified, no? Whether that's fraud, error, or illegal acts. So let's get again the responsibility that we probably have to be at least taken into. So again, sabi natin kanina, it is still the management responsibility together with those charged with governance or the TCWG or the board of directors to prevent and detect non-compliance by means of, number one, we're able to monitor legal requirements and ensuring that operating procedures are designed to meet these requirements. Second, we're able to institute and operate appropriate systems of internal control. I think internal controls will be the policies and procedures affected by the board of directors, and those management in order to prevent, detect, and correct these irregularities on a timely basis. No? Pero pakitandaan po natin that internal controls don't provide absolute assurance that irregularities will be eliminated. No? As long as these indicators of fraud are present, we call that one our elements of fraud are present. Okay, fraud will always be there no matter what. No? We're going to institute and operate systems of internal control. We're able to ensure that employees are properly trained and able to understand the code of conduct. Actually, code of conduct will be very important. Okay, when we try to cover our examination, because we want the company to be able to be armed with effective control and also a code of conduct to speak of. We're able to develop, publicize appropriate systems of internal control. We're able to monitor compliance with the code of conduct and acting appropriately to discipline employees who fail to comply with it. We're able to engage legal advisors to assist in monitoring legal requirements and maintain a registry of significant laws with which the entity has to comply with in its particular industry and a record of complaints. I think these are things that we allow management to have and able to implement in the course of our examination as professional accountant. Okay, so let's now take into account that a while ago, we're able to enumerate 8 important activities structured that we have to at least account for so that when we're able to perform all of them and document them over in the working papers, non-discovery of fraud will not mean liability on our part. On this particular standard, we're banking on 6 important activities. No? If all those 6 activities are taken in order and documented as the last step we're going to account for, then non-discovery of illegal activities will not mean liability on our part. No? Meaning that we have done the work in accordance with the standard requirement. Tapos ko lang ipakita sa inyo dito na mas mahirap hanapin ito kaysa doon sa isa. No? Kasi ito, karamihan ng mga irregularities taken as part of the illegal activities are able to affect operational more than financial. So mahirap maghanap talaga ng illegal acts that will have a financial impact on our financial reporting. No? So what are the important activities that we need to perform so that when we're able to cover them, non-discovery of illegal acts will not mean liability on our part because we have done the work in accordance with the standards requirement. So una, we're asked to obtain a general understanding of the legal and regulatory framework. So first thing and foremost, dapat meron tayong general, hindi po specific understanding. Only a general understanding of the legal and regulatory framework applicable to the entity and the industry itself and how the entity is able to comply with that framework. So gusto natin i-check na dapat ito yung mga registry of laws that should have been able to be complied by the entity itself because that is required by the industry to which the entity belongs to. Tinitingnan natin how the entity is able to comply with those relevant laws affecting its nature of business. No? Let's give one example. For example, we're talking about United Laboratories Incorporated. So this is a pharmaceutical company. We want to find out whether Unilab is able to follow those relevant laws affecting its industry, which is the pharma industry. And we want to find out exactly if Unilab is able to comply with that, with those relevant laws. No? And one of the most relevant laws that will affect pharmaceutical industry will be the Generics Act. We're able to allow pharmaceutical companies to do business in the Philippines if they will be manufacturing medicines that will also be covered as generic to give, of course, consumers the choice whether they want to buy the branded or the generic counterpart of those branded medicines that these big companies or pharmaceutical companies are able to produce. No? For example, Unilab has Right Med. okay, to cover its generic counterpart of its branded medicines. So consumers are given free choice whether they want, okay, to buy the branded ones or the counterpart, okay, generic, okay, of this, okay, branded medicine produced by this pharmaceutical company. No? So therefore we have right med that will address that needs, no, or those needs of the consumers. No? So when you see when doctors prescribe, okay, medicine, okay, even if they provide us the branded one, they have to give us the generic counterpart, so we have a choice whether we're going to buy, okay, the generic one or its branded, okay, medicine that is produced by that pharma company. No? I think that's very important. No? Okay, and I think you would agree with me that other big companies in the Philippines, like for example, Pfizer, Glaxo, and then we have Merck, Sanofi, were able to collaborate with Rhea, and they're able to come up with Rhea generics so that those branded medicines produced by these big pharmaceutical companies will able to have a counterpart, okay, generic, and that is provided by Rhea generics. No? So these are things that we should probably be aware of. Now, if we're able to audit these big companies, we want to find out whether the entity is able to comply with that framework. Okay, that should probably be able to be covered by them. So the next thing that we're going to do after we're able to obtain a general understand is that we're able to identify red flags. So a while ago, we have fraud risk factors to indicate, okay, the presence of the elements of fraud. Okay, we have the MIO or the SEC for our fraud risk factors. Here we have red flags. Red flags are indicators of the instances of non-compliance that we should probably be able to investigate if ever they are able to be appearing over in the environment that we're able to audit upon. So we have to be skeptical to investigate on them. No? So that's our second important activity. Then after which we're now going to obtain sufficient appropriate audit evidence about compliance with those laws and regulations generally recognized by the auditor to have an effect on the determination of material amounts and disclosures in the FS. No? So this is where we're going to consider providing either a qualified or adverse opinion on the evidence that they're going to collect, okay, that are relating to instances of non-compliance, okay, by the entity's management. So we're going to seek written representation. That's the fourth one. We're going to seek written representation that management has disclosed to the auditor all known, actual, or possible non-compliance with laws and regulations whose effect should be considered when preparing the financial statements. No? We're going to communicate. Remember, guys, communication will be one level higher from the one responsible of those illegal activities, and then we're going to document. So if you look at it, we have 8 a while ago, we have 6 in this particular standard. So therefore, that makes them covered as around 14 activities already that we need to perform as regards these two standards. No? So meron tayong 8 kanina. We have 6 here. So we need to document as well those procedures we performed starting from number 1 to number 4. No, number 5, when we communicate. So we have to also indicate to whom are we able to communicate those illegal activities that we're able to identify in our audit. No? So I want everyone to be clear on the fact that it is our responsibility as an auditor to ensure, okay, that we're able to cover the communication and the documentation required, so that will be a proof that we have complied with the requirement of our PSA 250. No? So ito yung evaluation that we need to consider kapag nagko-cover tayo ng evidence gathering. If the auditor concludes that non-compliance has a material effect on the financial statements and has not been properly reflected in the financial statements, so ang pwede natin ibigay na expression of opinion will either cover a qualified or an adverse opinion. Qualified, it will be material, but not pervasive. If it's going to be adverse, that will be material and pervasive. If the auditor is precluded or prevented by entity from obtaining sufficient appropriate audit evidence to evaluate whether the non-compliance that may be material to the financial statements has or is likely to have occurred, the auditor should express either a qualified or a disclaimer of opinion on the financial statements on the basis of a limitation on the scope of audit. So qualified will be material but not pervasive. There's going to be disclaimer that will be material and pervasive. So that means that if it's going to be preclusion, means inability on our part to obtain evidence. So meaning that the inability may be caused by the entity or by the circumstances that we're able to face when we do our engagement. So dalawang klase kasi ang prevention. Pwedeng management may have prevented us from performing those procedures, or the circumstances may have warranted that we cannot cover getting those evidences beyond our control. No? So may mga ganong issue, okay, that will probably have to be covered. So if the auditor is unable to determine whether illegal acts has occurred because of limitations imposed by circumstances rather than by the entity, the auditor should also consider the effect on the auditor's report. So pwede tayo mabigay ng either qualified or disclaimer of opinion. So remember, the auditor's duty of confidentiality would ordinarily preclude reporting non-compliance at third party. So take note, guys, that we are always observing the rules of confidentiality. That once we're able to identify irregularity here taken as an illegal act, it is our responsibility to inform the management and the board of directors about it. It is not going to be our responsibility to inform that to the third party. This should be the responsibility that should be covered by the management and the board of directors to rectify them by informing the regulatory body about it. No? Hindi po natin trabaho to report them over to the regulatory bodies. Now, pero that is a general rule because there are certain instances when we are asked by some laws and regulation that once we're able to identify them, we have to consider informing those regulatory bodies about these illegal activities, even if this will be taken to be uphold, this will probably violate the rules of confidentiality. So ibig sabihin, even if we're asked not to report on them, to report them to third parties, then the standard says minsan may mga revenue memorandum or law or regulation that will determine that kapag hindi nakakita tayo ng ganitong mga non-compliance, then we should be reporting, for example, BAR or example, Bangko Sentral ng Pilipinas about this non-compliance by the entity as regards certain provisions taken by them. Example, yung mga deposit level, so tinitingnan natin yan. Kapag hindi nasunod yan, that will be non-compliance and we report that one immediately to Bangko Sentral ng Pilipinas. No? So hindi natin kailangan i-consider yung tinatawag natin rules of confidentiality if it's now considered to be taken to be provided already by Bangko Sentral ng Pilipinas or BAR to that effect. No? So if ever the reported irregularity has not been taken action by the entity's board of directors and management, that will be withdrawal on our part. Kanina kasi ang withdrawal natin would only take kapag hindi tinanggap ni management yung ating qualified or disclaimer of opinion. Dito naman, we will now withdraw if ever the management will not be doing anything about the reported irregularity or non-compliance we're able to report upon. No? Okay, so ito po yung mga examples ng red flags that we should probably be more skeptical to consider in our audit. More especially if we're talking about illegal acts. Okay, that will be 250. So number one will be investigation by government departments or payment of fines or penalties. Pag nakita natin guys yung mga FS, tapos lalo natin nakikita na ang daming mga transactions relating to payments of fines or penalties, okay, lodged under legal or minsan naka-lodge yan minsan sa miscellaneous, no? So we have to be aware about investigating on them because that may probably be indicators of some illegal activities that may have been able to be covered by the entity. No? Payments for unspecified services or loans to consultants, related parties, employees or government employees. Then we have sales commission or agent fees that appear excessive in relation to those ordinarily paid by the entity or in its industry or to the services actually received. Purchasing at prices significantly above or below market price, unusual payments in cash, purchases in the form of cashier's check or cashier's check payable to bearer, or transfers to unnumbered bank accounts, unusual transactions with companies registered in tax havens, payments for goods or services made other than to the country from which the goods or services originated, payments without proper exchange control documentation, existence of an accounting system which fails, whether by design or by accident, or to provide an adequate audit trail or sufficient evidence. Unauthorized transactions or improperly recorded transactions. Then we have media comment. So these are very important, okay, that we have, okay, to consider. So let me remind everyone, okay, that these red flags will not mean, okay, that illegal acts have been committed, but once illegal acts have been identified by the auditor, surely these indicators are present. Just like fraud risk factors. Pag sinabi natin fraud risk factors, it does not mean that the presence of the fraud risk factors will mean there are frauds that we can probably able to identify. But once we are able to identify frauds, surely these indicators are present, whether that will be fraud risk factors affecting management fraud or fraud risk factors affecting employee fraud. So what is important is just we have to be skeptical about the situation. We have to be more investigative and more corroborative about situations or indicators that may indicate the presence of fraud or indicate the presence of illegal acts. And I think that's being able to develop. The attitude of able to develop, guys, skepticism is something that we are able to develop and learn so that we can probably be able to be more prudent in our approach when we do our audit. No? So the last standard that will probably affect our responsibilities will cover communication. No? I think you always agree with me, guys, that the value of audit lies when we're able to communicate. No? Kasi parang ang pinaka-value added activity ng audit is communication. No? And I think we're able to be more transparent when we're able to communicate to the board of directors. And what are those things that we need to communicate upon to the board of directors or those charged with governance? We call that one AMGI. No? So ang tawag natin yan, audit matters of governance interests. Or simply, can I just be clear, guys, napakalaga ng standard nito because this will be our basis later when we do our key audit matters communicated in the auditor's report. Kapag nag-audit tayo ng listed entities. Kasi pag nag-audit tayo ng listed entities, we are required by PSA 700 to communicate key audit matters. At yung key audit matters na yan will come from the 260. So, ibig sabihin, pag wala tayong na-communicate na 260 or AMGI, wala rin tayong key audit matters that we're able to communicate affecting the listed entities. No? Kasi required kasi ngayon, kapag nag-audit tayo ng listed entity for us to communicate key audit matters. At yung key audit matters nito will come from this standard 260. Those matters that we have communicated to the board of directors on a timely basis. No? So meaning that we're going to provide the communication of this AMGI on a timely basis. So let's try to cover relevant terminologies that will affect this relevant standard. So number one will be governance. Pag sinabi natin governance, this is a term used to describe the role of persons entrusted with supervision. So meron tayong supervision, control, and direction. So actually, three things will be covering governance. We're able to control, direct, and supervise the entity. And that's governance function. No? Kapag sinabi naman those charged with governance, these are the persons with responsibility for the oversight of the strategic direction of the entity and obligations related to the accountability of the entity. And when I talk about those charged with governance, this will include oversight of the financial reporting process itself. No? So the term those charged with governance will include both board of directors and audit committee. Kasi ang audit committee is a special committee of the BOD. So ito yung mga absentee shareholders. And I think there are two things the audit committee will be doing. Number one is to establish an internal audit function. I think the internal audit function is established by our audit committee. Okay, so remember that another important thing that the audit committee does is to contract an external auditor to do a financial statement audit for the entity. So that's also an important function of the audit committee. No? Okay, so remember yung ating internal audit function is created by the audit com at ang audit com din ang namimili kung sino maging external auditor natin that will cover the examination of the entity's financial statement. So that is done by the role of the audit committee. No? So pag sinabi naman nating management, okay, these are those responsible for the achieving the objectives of the entity and who have the executive authority. So parang lumalabas ang management is able to execute the activities that should probably have been strategized by the board of directors, no? And make decisions by which these objectives are pursued. The responsibilities include financial statements and the system of internal control over financial reporting. As sinabi naman natin, audit matters of governance interests. They're those that arose from the audit of financial statements and in the opinion of the auditor are both important and relevant to those charged with governance in the oversight of financial reporting and disclosure process. No? So remember that ang ating audit matters of governance interest will include only those matters that have come to the attention of the auditor as a result of the performance of the audit. Actually, we don't specifically pinpoint them. So ibig sabihin, if we're able to do the work in accordance with the standards, they will arise as part of our engagement performance. So hindi po natin kailangan specifically to look for them. So they will just arise because we did the work based on the requirement of the standard. And take note, guys, AMGIs will not include those that we have already communicated in the previous audit. So this will only affect the current audit, that we're able to perform. Okay, so therefore, these are the ones that we're able to communicate to the board of directors. Now, hindi kasama dito yung mga AMGIs that were taken already in the previous audits, that were already been communicated to the board of directors. No? So I think that we'll probably try to differentiate this over with the AMGIs taken in the other periods. No? We're able to do the audit. No? Can I just also emphasize this important standard? Okay, the auditor is not required in an audit, to design procedures for specifically identifying them, no? So hindi mo kailangan specifically identify them kasi kapag ginawa mo yung audit in accordance with the requirement of PSA 260, surely you will be able to find this over shown over in the financial statement audit that you're able to perform, no? For corporations covered by SEC, Code of Corporate Governance, as well as the banks, the board of directors primarily will be responsible for corporate governance for such entities. Remember that one of the duties of the board of directors is the creation of the audit com that will be responsible for the setup of internal audit function and also to able to contract an external auditor, assuming we're going to contract an external auditor to do the work for us. No? So ito po yung mga matters that we need to communicate on a timely basis. So makikita mo that one of the most important matters that we need to provide as communication will be our responsibility in relation to the FS. No? Actual responsibility natin there will be to express an opinion on whether the financial statements are fairly stated in all material respects. And the second overall objective here, that we're able to account as responsibilities will be to, I think that to communicate our opinion in a written report. We call that our attestation report. So that's how important it is, to cover our engagement. No? So kasama din po dyan yung planned scope and timing ng audit. So we also try to communicate our strategy by which we're able to perform the examination, whether that will be a restricted or extensive approach. Actually, ito yung dalawang approaches that we were going to discuss upon. Okay, whether that will be taken as an extensive approach or we're able to cover a restricted approach. No? We're able to cover yung significant findings on matters. I think there's so many things that we have to at least account for under significant findings. Kasama din yung mga significant risk, significant adjustments, significant consultation, material uncorrected misstatements that we need to correct before financial statements are provided. No? So tinitingnan ng auditor yan. The auditor will have to check their significant findings and find out whether this will be related to the this will be related in the conduct of our examination. No? Kasama din ng auditor's independence only for listed entities. So hinihingi ng mga BOD ng listed entities yung ethical requirement ng engagement team natin when they perform engagement with us. No? Titignan natin yung kanilang no? And of course, kapag listed, independence will be a requirement. So we have to indicate here who are our members and whether they met the independence requirement set forth with the Philippine Code of Ethics. No? So tinitingnan natin yan, yung mga listed entities na yan. No? So ito yung mga significant matters na lagi natin pinagkukuhanan later ng ating key audit matters. Actually, sa key audit matters, ang mga sinisilip natin yan will be significant matters. And these significant matters include any of the following. Number one, we have to cover significant accounting policies and practices that could have a material effect on the entity's financial statements, significant risk and exposures such as pending litigation. We have audit adjustments that would probably be part of the matters to be communicated, material uncertainties that may cast doubt on the entity's ability to project going concern. Remember that material uncertainties will also be an important matter to be communicated, significant disagreements with management, expected modification of the auditor's report, and material weaknesses or significant deficiencies in internal control will also have to be included. Okay, and the form of communication that we're able to perform will either be covered as oral or written, no? So, meron mga factors that will determine whether you're going to do it written, okay? But in all aspect, kahit gamitin mo yung oral communication or matters provided orally will also have to be documented in the working paper, no? So, ito po yung mga factors to decide upon whether we're going to take it oral or written. No? Okay, so number one will be the size, the operating structure, the legal structure, and the communication processes of the entity being audited. Number two, the nature, the sensitivity, and significance of the audit, matters of governance interest. Okay, number three will be arrangements made with respect to periodic meetings or reporting of our ANGI or audit matters of governance interest. No? And the amount of ongoing contact, not past contact, and dialogue the auditor has with those board of directors or those charged with governance. No? Okay. So these are all the matters that we need to cover, no? At any point, no? Okay, can we request everyone to turn on the webcams as I now try to sum up what we have covered for today. So let's use the remaining time for us to cover asking questions that may affect. Can I just ensure that everyone will be able to be remembering all these salient provisions of the responsibility standards. Paki-open po yung webcams natin right now. So, so let's just sum up kung ano yung mga responsibility standards that we have already covered as part of our, kasi next week when we resume, we're now going to talk about the risk-based approach. So, kukunin na natin yung tatlong major phases ng audit: risk assessment, risk response, at saka reporting and conclusion. So we're going to list down ano ba yung mga importanteng activities that we need to cover for those three major phases of our risk-based audit. Kasi tapos na tayo sa responsibilities, tapos na-discuss natin yung ethical and regulatory framework. Kasi tandaan natin, tatlong frameworks lagi ang magko-govern sa practice natin. Am I correct? What are those three frameworks that will govern our practice? Can you put that over in the public chat? What are those three important frameworks that will define our performance of the engagement? Can you write those three letters? Or what are those three letters we're able to talk about in the public chat? So utilizing public chat nyo para makita nyo yung devices whether they're working. Parang wala akong makitang chat. What are the frameworks that will define our practice? I mentioned those three letters. Write them down. Okay? That will not be POW. POW is not going to be that is fraud risk factor. No? Okay, and that is elements of fraud. No? PRL yan. What is P? In the conduct of our So yung PRL na yan, can you just probably professional framework will be the first one. What's the second one that will affect our ethical framework? That will be the legal will be the third one. Okay, meron tayong regulatory that will be the ethical framework. Tapos yung legal will be yung Republic Act 9298 and Republic Act 10912. Ito yung CPD Act of 2016. Tama ba? Am I clear on that one? Can I just also provide some inputs for this morning? We celebrated our 100 years celebration last March 17. Have you not noticed that in the Facebook we're able to see that we're able to celebrate our centenary celebration? So we're able to be able to see the importance of the professional practice way back March 17, 1923. Tama ba? So, eto na tayo. We're now moving to 2023. So, dapat we have awarded 100 notable CPAs in the professional practice. And then we have one senator, Senate President Manuel Villar, have one department secretary, that will be a Secretary Benjamin Docno of the budget, okay? And we have several presidents of the sectoral organization, ACPAC, ACPAP, okay? We have our ACPAE, NACPAE, and our DACPA. So ito yung mga notable CPAs, no? So sa education, marami tayong inawardan, no? Okay, that would probably be able to be emulated by everyone, no? So ito yung mga ano natin, no? So let me also remind everyone, okay? Have we covered already documentation in our context of discussion last time? Natapos na natin documentation. That will be, of course, part and parcel of our, ano? Nasaan yung aking spokesperson dito? Na-take up na natin siya. Tapos na natin lahat ng mga responsibilities, am I correct? Quality control system in HILEM, terms of engagement, engagement letter, tama ba? We have so can you see a reaction button na lahat ng standards are all discussed upon relevant to our examination. Okay, kailan bang examination nyo? Wala na naman tayong device, wala na naman tayong ano. Can we just make sure that it's online so we can probably have to be aware about the devices as well, no? Para nagiging limitation natin that I cannot probably type. Ano yan ulit? Sino nag-open ng web, ng kanyang, nag-turn on ng kanyang microphone? Ano ulit yan?
Sir po yung pinaka-post mo namin.
Ulit?
Next week po yung quiz namin, March.
Pero that will not cover our date, our time element. Hindi ma-apektuhan yung ating ano, no? So it will be taken on another day. Am I correct? Tama ba ako?
Yes po.
Yes, po.
Okay, so that will be taken. So we're going to meet still on next week for the risk-based audit, no? Kasi yung risk-based naman, that will be our basis for the midterm. Tama ba? Kasi midterm niya will follow afterwards. Tama ba? Am I correct? Ganun kabilis ang okay? Pag-cover ng exam. So risk-based ka agad yung susunod natin. Tapos yung examination natin will be considered cumulative in terms of provision of questions. So I can still ask questions taken from the first topic we took up until the last topic we're going to take up during that particular week of examination. So next week, magko-cover pa tayo ng risk-based. So we will talk about the approach by which audit will have to be conducted by our prudent auditors like you. No? Okay? May question po ba mag-arise with anyone? So all things are in order for everyone. So meaning that we have gotten all the requirements, okay, we need to get. Okay, so we can probably try to say we're ready to take the examination next week. Tama ba? Okay. So try to also practice answering some questions taken from some of the reviewers that you may probably be able to have, no? Kasi some of you may be able to borrow some reviewers. So I think it's good also to at least practice answering some questions and also looking at some reviewers as well, so that you will be armed with questions that may probably affect the quiz, no? So I'm getting the screenshot of those attendees, okay, for this morning. Okay, tingnan natin. Unless otherwise, may questions pa kayo? May questions pa ba tayo? Yung odd theory po will be March 28. Ito pa yung quiz 2, March 28 pa. So that will be Tuesday. Tama ba? You don't have classes on Tuesday, am I correct? Wala ba? Wala kayong klase ng Tuesday?
Meron pa din po ata ng 6 p.m.
Meron ano yun?
6 p.m. po kasi yung class namin. Nun
So magte-take yung umaga.
8 to 5 po ang quiz.
You better take it kasi naman you have to go here and then inside the campus, no? Okay, take it as online, no? Okay, baka naman yung cameras nyo pa nagtitignan yung exam, hindi makapag-open. Okay, gano'n na naman kasi dapat integrity of the exam na naman. So magiging limitation na naman yung devices, no? Eh, napag-usapan ba yung mga hindi makapag-open ng camera? Okay.
Required po sir ng dual cam eh.
O dual cam, yung online hindi ka kapag-dual cam. O paano pa tayo makakapagkuha ng exam, di ba? Yung regular online class, hindi tayo makapag-open ng webcam. Paano pa nag-cover tayo ng actual exam? Kaya ba? Kaya ba ng dual cam?
Kaya po sir, kaya.
Kaya. For some. Pero I don't know if everyone. Kung ngayon nga, hindi ako makapag-cover ng complete attendance Tama ba ako? So that will be another issue. No? So sana everyone will be able to have it. No? Okay? Another issue is the bandwidth. No? Okay? Lalo na kapag nag-data mobile ka, may hirapan ka. At least you have to have a strong bandwidth. Kahit naman strong, tapos biglang magkakaroon ng intermittent connection during that day. No? Diba? Parang conditional na naman. Sige. I'm taking a screenshot of everyone, no? Parang everyone is at home, okay, with the lessons. How are you doing with your other classes? Okay naman. Okay, manage na natin. Winsal, asa si Winsal? Si Winsal ang aking spokesperson dito, no? Winsal, ando ka pala, okay? How are you doing with your subjects? Okay naman, manage na.
Okay pa naman sir.
Okay, sige, manage na siya. So I'm taking a screenshot as my last screenshot for the unless you don't have questions. So wala namang questions, ibig sabihin everyone has understood. Okay na kasi. Maganda ba yung audio? Okay, para nag-echo ba ako? Okay naman. Winsal. Okay naman, the audio?
Okay naman po sir.
So, okay. Baka i-upload ko yung mga recording, ask ko muna information kasi yung face-to-face ko walang recording. So parang magiging no? So parang I'm also preaching at the same concept na kapag online, umattend kayo, so walang recording. Yung isa naman, face-to-face, wala ding recording kasi face-to-face sila. So kasi kapag iaabot ko sa inyo yung recording, that will be at least disadvantage on the face-to-face. Tama ba? Kaya hindi ako makapag-upload kasi to give weight that both sections will be able to manage them attending the regular classes as scheduled, no? Unless otherwise, okay, wala kayong makukuha, no? So, take na ko ng screenshot from everyone. 1, 2, 3. On the other panel, I'm going to get that same screenshot for the other panel. 1, 2, 3. Okay, if there will be no questions, I call it a day for everyone. Good day to everyone. I will see each other then next week for risk-based approach discussion. Bye, everyone.
Thank you sir.
Thank you po.
Thank you, everyone.